So across Canada, increasing attention is given to the fact that over half of Indigenous people are now living off reserve in places such as the city of Regina, here in Treaty 4 territory in the homeland of the Métis. And while the downstream effects of colonialism are often seen as an Indigenous problem, it's now more commonly understood that here in the prairies, we are all treaty people. And as such, the challenges and opportunities presented by sharing our city spaces also belong to non-Indigenous people such as myself. So, as a white settler studying urban planning, my research asks two questions. First, to what extent are municipalities and Indigenous communities working together on common planning initiatives? And second, what skills do non-Indigenous people have, or maybe don't have, that can facilitate better relationships and thus better planning outcomes? So, to answer these two questions, I focused on the unique experience of Thompson, a northern city in Manitoba where over 40% of the population identifies as Indigenous, and yet at present, no Indigenous people hold either city council or senior administrative positions. So, using municipal Indigenous planning theory, which sees practitioners operating from the understanding that we coexist in space and we co-produce our futures, I examined the experiences of both municipal and Indigenous actors with respect to working with one another, as well as the resultant policy documents. So, after 12 interviews, one group interview, and dozens of documents, the story of Thompson began to unfold. And it's a common story of taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. So while award-winning policies and plans were collaboratively written, overall implementation was described as somewhat lacking. Furthermore, participants identified racism as a key barrier, not only at large in the community, but specifically at City Hall. So, what skills can non-Indigenous people like myself develop? Well, I heard things such as being respectful, being patient, being a good listener. And while these are genuinely good skills to have, they're not often enough to overcome barriers such as systemic racism. However, I also heard ideas such as the importance of framing Indigenous people as rights holders rather than stakeholders in the context of the city, reflecting on one's own worldviews and practices, as well as being mindful of the demands that we put on our Indigenous partners. So, not treating one person as the knowledge keeper of all things Indigenous, for instance. But these ideas are not necessarily new. In fact, they're more often discussed by anti-racist scholars and theorists than by urban planners. And as such, a number of writings and toolkits are already in existence. So, into the future, my research suggests that planners ought to explore the ways in which these allyship resources might be adapted and adopted for our professional practices. Thank you.